So again, welcome to all of you who are here, and a special welcome to those that are watching online. As Branton said, the pastors and his family are taking some well-deserved time at spring break, and he showed great faith or extremely poor judgment, one or the other, asking me to preach in his absence today. So we'll see by the end of the service. But when you go on Yelp later today to give your review, please be kind. I want to thank Tony Davis for giving the welcome this morning. Even though he spells Tony wrong, he put an extra E in there for some reason. He's become a really good friend to me. He teaches our Wednesday night Bible study for the gray-haired silverback guys in the church, and he does a wonderful job. He really dives into the Word and ties things together from New Testament and Old Testament. And so any of you guys that have gray hair like I do, and you're not busy on Wednesday nights, you could sure have an enjoyable time coming and studying under Tony. He also leads our church safety and security team and does a fantastic job with that. He spent his entire career in the security business for the government and has brought those talents to us. And we have a great team of volunteers that Tony is our captain of, and you can recognize those volunteers because they wear orange lanyards. You saw Tony's lanyard earlier. This group gets together every month and looks at different protocols for keeping the church safe and secure and responding to medical emergencies and so forth. So if while you're here you have any need of something like that, just look for somebody with an orange lanyard around their neck and we'll be happy to help you out. Today we are in Genesis chapter 24, and to review, we've been going through Genesis a chapter a week. So 3 weeks ago we were in Genesis 21 and read the story of God's faithfulness in his promise to Abraham that he would make from him a mighty nation. So even though Abraham and his wife Sarah were very well advanced in years. Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90 when their son Isaac was born. Now, I took care of some older patients when I was practicing obstetrics, but I didn't take care of any 90-year-olds. That's true geriatric obstetrics. But God worked a miracle there and brought them a son, and that after he had promised Abraham that he was going to bring from him a great nation, he had one son, Isaac. And so this is really important because we have to remember that it's important to wait on God's timing and wait on God's plan. Even though what he's asking us to do may seem impossible, he has a plan. 2 weeks ago, then we were in Genesis 22, where we read the story of Abraham and God directing him to sacrifice that son Isaac. Now, wait a minute, God. How are we going to do this great nation if you bump off my kid before I have grandchildren? Isaac and his father were both very faithful. Abraham made all the preparations to sacrifice his son, and Isaac even participated willingly. Can I have that first slide? A couple of years ago, I saw this cartoon. Let's see if we got it. You've all heard that saying that punctuation is important. You know, let's eat grandma versus let's eat, comma, grandma. Very different meanings. So, there we go. So here in the cartoon, Isaac says, here's the wood for the sacrifice, Dad. Groovy. And here's the dagger for the sacrifice, Dad. Keen. Then Isaac says, where's the sacrifice? God will provide, Isaac. Wait, did you say God will provide, comma, Isaac, or God will provide Isaac? Come here, son. I ain't budging until you put in a comma. But Isaac did willingly allow himself to be tied up by his father and placed on that altar. But then God showed his faithfulness again and said, wait, just as Abraham's ready to plunge the dagger into the chest of his son, God says, stop, I've got a different plan. And immediately appears a ram and tangled up in a nearby bush, and they capture that ram and use it to sacrifice to God. Last week, we read in chapter 23 the story of the death of Sarah. So they're now in Canaan, which is the promised land, what is now modern-day Israel. And Sarah dies, and Abraham makes a quest to find a piece of land with a cave where he can bury his wife. You see, this is signaling a commitment that he knows God intends for him to stay in the promised land of Canaan as the home to this great nation that God has promised. So today we come to today's passage in Genesis 24. So we know that Sarah died at the age of 127, so Isaac's 37 years old, still a bachelor. And Abraham knows that his time is growing short. He's definitely up in age. And he wants to find a suitable wife for his son Isaac. Again, this is important because this spouse will be the one to bear children to Isaac to create this great nation that God has promised. So the parents in the congregation, how many of you pray or have prayed for your kids to find the right spouse? I think we all have. I certainly have, and continue to do so. My son got married back in November, and I can't be happier with his choice. He definitely outkicked his coverage. But there's lots of ways that we meet our prospective spouses. Back in my day, it was pretty simple. You met at a school dance or in class at school. I mean, I have a number of friends who married their high school sweetheart and are still together today. How many of y'all are married to your high school sweetheart? There's a few of them. Yeah. I know Kevin and Jennifer met at, 5 and 6 at a baby beauty pageant, right? Great story. You ought to see the pictures. It's really cute. So there are now today a lot of couples, probably at least 50 or 60% of couples are actually meeting online. There are a number of different sites out there where people can meet members of the opposite sex. Now, some of them are geared more toward casual relationships, and those are the ones you probably ought to stay away from. But there are some, like eHarmony and Match.com, that say that they are going to take you through a series of questions that will really probe into deeply what things are important to you, what your beliefs are, what priorities you have in your life. And they say that by doing that, they can find couples that will be compatible. And so there's a lot of things that lead to compatibility. And again, some of these sites, there's a picture and a little bit of a bio. This is Joe, and he's 26 years old, and he likes to play tennis. And, sometimes people will kind of buff up their picture that they put on there and make themselves look as good as possible, right lighting, and, work out a little bit for a couple weeks before they take the picture. There are other sites that are geared specifically toward Christians. There's one called Christian Mingle, or one called Christian Cupid, and there's religion-specific sites such as Catholic Match and J-Date for Jewish singles. There are even age-specific sites. So there are sites for old guys like me that may be looking to find another spouse after another spouse passes away. These include sites like Silver Singles, Date My Age, and OurTime.com. But I met my spouse before any of that existed. I met my spouse, kids, you're not going to believe this, before personal phones, before personal computers. We would send up smoke signals. No, just but I met my wife at church. And she was 6th grade, I was 7th. And just a little aside, I was able to meet her at church. We talked earlier about Year One and inviting people to church, and the remarkable number of times that if you invite somebody, they'll actually come with you. Well, my wife grew up in a family where she was not in church, but she moved into a neighborhood, and her next door neighbor was a girl from my class, a year older than her, who she got to be good friends with, and they invited Laura to come to church with them. And if it had not been for that, I would have never met her. And the story would have been very different. But I was able to know that she was a Christian, and that we had shared values and shared beliefs, which made having a successful marriage a lot easier. And we were married almost 38 years before she passed away. In Genesis 24, we read, "So Abraham said to his oldest servant of his house, the one who ruled over all that he had, and said to him, 'Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and to my own relatives to get a wife for my son Isaac.'" He wants this servant to find a prospective wife for his son with shared values, shared history, shared heritage. So the servant then asks him in verse 5, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" And Abraham answers him in verses 6 through 9 and says, "No, don't take my son back there," because he knows that God has willed that this great nation that has been promised is also supposed to come to pass in this new land. So he tells his servant that if she will not return with him, he will be released from this oath. Abraham knows that the people from his homeland will remember that he is wealthy and successful, and that he has shared values and heritage. But he sends his servant with evidence of that to help convince the prospective bride that this trip will be worth the risk and the effort. So we read in Genesis 24, verse 10, "Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor." Now, Nahor was Abraham's brother. He had 2 brothers. And Nahor was one of his brothers, and the town where they grew up was now named for Nahor. And he had stayed behind in the land of Mesopotamia, which was Abraham's homeland. Can we have that second slide? So a little geography. So this is the area. And you see Mesopotamia there to the right, and Canaan is over here on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea in what is now Israel and that area. So the word Mesopotamia, meso means between, Potamia means river, so this is the land between the rivers. So you can see the land between the Tigris and Euphrates River, and this is what is the so-called Fertile Crescent. So this was very fertile land, which was great for these people to settle and raise crops. And there's good land around the area of Canaan, but the area between, in white, is the Negev Desert. Not very hospitable. So the servant leaves with 10 camels, and they cross the Negev to go to the town of Nahor. Now, this is a journey of about 600 miles, traveling about 25 to 30 miles a day, depending on weather and conditions. This journey would take 3 to 4 weeks. The camels were well suited for this journey, able to go many days with limited food and water. But once they reach their destination and there's adequate water, and they can be watered, they can easily drink 20 to 30 gallons of water in 20 to 30 minutes. That's going to be important in a minute. So how did you know that your spouse was the one? Most couples have a cute story like Kevin and Jennifer about how they met, but how did you know that this was the one? Online dating sites give you these clues. Again, some of them are superficial, what their height and weight and their hair color, or do they have hair? I knew a young woman when I was younger that loved to wear high heels, and one of her litmus tests was she wouldn't date a guy unless he was still taller than her with her heels on. I had another friend who said he knew that his spouse was the one when she was the first one to say those 3 little words: "Let's get tacos." When I met Laura, I was driving an old blue single cab Chevy pickup with a bench seat. And one of my friends told me, he said, you'll know that a girl's really interested if when you go around, this is before fobs, you had to actually unlock the door with a key. But when you unlock the door and let her in, if she slides across that bench seat and unlocks your door and then stays there in the middle, you'll know that she's interested. And on our first date, Laura did just that. And I started laughing. And she asked what I was laughing about, and I told her what my friend had said, and she blushed, and I was hooked. Abraham's servant was looking for a sign from God that he was choosing the right girl for Isaac, the one. So in verse 12 it says, "Then he prayed, 'Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, if she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one that you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master.'" So remember I said that a thirsty camel could drink 20 to 30 gallons of water. There's 10 camels. So this young lady would have to bring enough pitchers of water to put in the trough 200 to 300 gallons of water. That's going to take a minute. And while she's doing this, the servant realizes that God has answered his prayer. So as soon as he's made this prayer to God, out comes Rebecca. She's beautiful, a young maiden. Swipe right. She is the granddaughter of Abraham's brother Nahor. So Abraham's great niece and Isaac's second cousin. So this is somebody from his clan, but not too close. And she's probably younger than Isaac. So in verse 15 we read, "Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abram's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, 'Please, give me a little water from your jar.' 'Drink, my lord,' she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, 'I will draw water for your camels too, until they've had enough to drink.' So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful." So he's made the specific prayer of a sign he wants from God, and God has answered him with that very specific sign. So it looks like she may be the one. Now he just needs to seal the deal. So in verse 22 we read, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a beka and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. There's 2 bekas to a shekel. So we got 10.5 shekels of gold, or about 4.5 ounces of gold. And he asked her, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" And she answered him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor." And she added, "We have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night." Now today, when young ladies get engaged, they get a ring, usually. Small ring on their finger, usually with a diamond. Pretty nice, very practical. This ring was different. This is the nose ring. Can I have that third slide? So this is something like what the servant would have given to Rebekah. This and two bracelets for her wrists. About 4.5 ounces of pure gold. Now today on the market, gold is trading at about $5,000 an ounce. So in today's value, that's around $20,000. That's a pretty nice engagement gift. So it looks like we have an agreement in principle. The servant is relieved and gives thanks to God. So as we read in verse 26, then the man bowed down and worshiped the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." Y'all remember a few years ago the movie Meet the Parents? Well, now it's time to meet the family. So the servant follows Rebekah to her home, and the young woman ran in and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother named Laban, and he hurried out to the man at the spring. As soon as he had seen the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and heard Rebekah tell what the man had said to her, he went out to the man and found him standing by the camels near the spring. "Come, you who are blessed by the Lord," he said. "Why are you standing out here? I have prepared the house and a place for the camels." So the man went to the house, and the camels were unloaded. Straw and fodder were brought for the camels, and water for him and his men to wash their feet. The food was set before him, but he said, "I will not eat until I have told you what I have to say." So he has to share this great story about how we met again. "So then tell us," Laban said. And he said, "I am Abram's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly, and he has become wealthy. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female servants, and camels and donkeys. My master's wife Sarah has borne him a son in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear an oath and said, 'You must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but go to my father's family and to my own clan and get a wife for my son.' Then I asked my master, 'What if the woman will not come back with me?' He replied, 'The Lord, before whom I have walked faithfully, will send his angel with you and make your journey a success, so that you can get a wife for my son from my own clan and from my father's family. You will be released from my oath if when you go to my clan, they refuse to give her to you. Then you will be released from the oath. When I came to the spring today, I said, Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you will, please grant success to the journey on which I have come. See, I am standing beside this spring. If a young woman comes out to draw water, and I say to her, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and she says to me, drink, and I'll draw water for your camels too, let her be the one the Lord has chosen for my master's son." Before I finished praying in my heart, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew water, and I said to her, please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I'll water your camels too. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. I asked her, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put the ring in her nose and the bracelets on her arm, and I bowed down and worshiped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to get the granddaughter of my master's son, of my master's brother for his son. Now, if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so that I know which way to turn. So we've all seen the pictures when somebody gets engaged now with the sign, she said yes. Brother Laban and his family are contemplating this and immediately realize that this is God's will. And so Laban and Bethuel answered, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah, take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed." So, good decision for everybody involved. Then in verse 24 we read, when Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. And he also gave costly gifts to her brother and her mother. So everybody makes out like bandits. And now we have an agreement in principle. So it's time to head home, but there's one more little wrinkle. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. When they got up the next morning, he said, "Send me on my way to my master." But her brother and her mother replied, "Well, let the young woman remain with us, for a while, 10 days or so, and then you can go." The servant doesn't want to have a delay, so he says, "Do not detain me. Now that the Lord has granted success to my journey, send me on my way so that I may go to my master." But we don't know exactly why they wanted the delay. Perhaps they knew that she was going to be going a long way and they might not ever see her again. Perhaps they were hoping for maybe a little bit of a bump in the dowry. I don't know. But finally, they make the decision that, yes, she will go with him. So then they said, "Let's call the young woman and ask her about it." Well, that's a good idea. We've sort of made this decision for her. Why don't we find out what she wants to do? So they said, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." So now all is complete except finding out if Isaac's happy with the choice. So let's ride. They get on the camels and go back to the land of Canaan. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the cities of their enemies." Then Rebekah and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. So now the 4-week journey back to Canaan and to meet her prospective husband, Isaac. This part kind of reminds me a little bit of the old show, The Dating Game. How many of y'all remember The Dating Game? So there'd be a stage and there'd be a wall. On one side was either a guy or a girl, and on the other side of the wall was 3 members of the opposite sex. And they would ask questions, and by the answers, the one was supposed to decide who she wanted to go on a date with. And when they finally made the decision, I'm going to go with number 1 or number 2 or number 3, then they would introduce the others, the ones that didn't make the cut. And they would come around the wall and shake hands or give a hug. And then the one that was chosen would come around, and you always kind of watched the one to see what was their reaction going to be. It was like, "Oh, I should have gone with number 2." But most of the time it worked out. So we're going to see if Isaac's pretty happy with the choice. So in verse 62 we read, "Now Isaac has come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate, and when he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, 'Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?' 'He is my master,' the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all that he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah." So I guess he's pretty happy. "And she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death." So great how we met story. Not the kind we have today usually, but a great illustration of how God has a plan for our life, and that we should seek his will. And it's not just in choosing a spouse, although, as Tony said, that's a very important thing to think about. Your happiness in life will be greatly influenced by your life partner. And choosing somebody who has like beliefs and values and heritage goes a long way toward making sure that you're going to have a successful union. But there's lots of other things that you need to think about. You need to go to church together. You need to raise your children to hear about Jesus and learn to love him. But if we seek God's guidance in the major decisions of our life and are open and obedient to his will, he will be faithful to provide the best answer for our lives. And that could be your choice of your profession or where you're going to live. Don't be afraid to ask God what his will is. You know, God has a great plan for all of us. His most important plan was that he planned for our salvation. And he did that by sending his son to die on the cross for us and to raise him from the dead. And all these other decisions, who your spouse is and what your job is and where you're going to live, pale in comparison to if you made the decision to ask Jesus into your heart and life and make him Lord of your life. So today, as we wrap up, Brandon and his team are going to come up and play. If you have anything that you want to talk to us about, Noel's going to be down here at the front. I'll be available. If God is directing you to bring your family to this church as a place to worship, if you're feeling God's call for that, we're here to receive you. If there's anyone here who feels that God is saying, you know, I'd like to come into your heart and life and be your Lord and Master, if you're ready to make that decision today, there will be somebody here to welcome you. If y'all will join me in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for the fact that you have a plan for each one of us, and that if we'll just be still and listen, you'll make that plan known to us, and that if we're faithful and obedient back to you, that you will give us the things that are the desires of our heart and the things that will bring us closer to you. We ask that you would open each heart here today. If there's anyone who needs to know you in a personal and real way, Lord, we ask that you would give them the boldness to come forward this morning and make that decision. We ask all these things in your name. Amen.